Hey everyone, I just wanted to check in with you here at the end of Unit 1. Of course, you can see and probably hear that I'm at Starbucks this morning getting some work done. I just finished reading through the What is History discussion. That's always one of my favorites, and I have some comments to make to you on that. Thinking about our work on Twitter, I will be turning to that next. So if by the end of today you have a 0 for the Unit 1 Twitter assignment, that probably just means that I haven't yet found you on Twitter. So just send me a tweet at CNMBrandon or email me your Twitter handle, your username, so that I can find you there and be sure to give you credit for your work. I'll be commenting on the primary and secondary sources that you've shared, and I've already done that for several of you who posted your Twitter work earlier in the week. Next week, with Unit 2, we'll be getting into the regular routine of the course. So we'll be using our reading tweets to discuss, or at least have our initial discussion of the readings and the videos, and then we will be working on the timeline and completing journal entries. Keep in mind that you'll have some discussions to do that are due by the end of the semester, the end of the 8 weeks, and you'll have a final project that will be due in 3 steps over the course of the term. Those are just the things to keep in mind. As always, and I know I say this every time I'm on a video or I'm on an email or anything, but as always, please ask questions whenever you have them, because I can't help you if I don't know that you need some help or that you have some questions, and I'm always happy to help, so please don't hesitate to ask. All right, so I want to talk for just a minute about history and historical thinking and sources. I really like big questions that don't have definitive answers, and so that's why history appeals to me, I think. As we found, as we were having our discussion in Blackboard on the discussion board, history has multiple definitions. It's based on perspectives and perceptions of what happened in the past. And so as one theorist of history has put it, there is kind of a tension between history as the events that happened and history as the way that we talk about and think about those events, the way that we put them into a story. So there absolutely is, on some plane of reality, the fact that events happened. They're done, they're the past, that's history. But most importantly, we have to figure out what happened in the past. We have to figure out why those events might be important to us, and why they might help us in the present. For that reason, the study of history can be pretty imperfect, as we've noted. It's based on imperfect human sources and imperfect humans trying to understand what happened. We also have to throw in power relations and difference into the mix. One of the reasons that I really like history, aside from just having big questions that are unanswerable, is the idea that history can help us to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. If we really try to study multiple perspectives and put the puzzle together, as I mentioned in the first chapter of the reading, we can gain empathy for others. We can gain better cross-cultural understandings. And I think that is so important for us as human beings to understand the conflicts and struggles that we came from in the past, but also to see the places where people have figured it out. People have figured out how to understand one another, how to get along, and how to work together. Those moments are also probably more important than those moments of conflict. So I have some notes here in front of me. So again, empathy, I think, is an important thing that comes from the study of history. It's one of those intangible things it's hard to kind of put out there in a measurable way, the way that higher ed likes us to do these days, but it's something that we can all get from the study of the past if we do it with an open mind. And many of us, as we talked about historical thinking, defined it as having an open mind and understanding the methodologies that historians use to figure out what happened in the past. I think that's a really great way of putting it. Of course, there are the 5 C's of historical thinking. One that I'd really like to underscore is context. We need to recognize that history is a foreign country, as someone has once put it, and that people did things differently then. People thought about even things like ethics differently. Now, that's not to say that we can excuse people for horrendous actions in the past because they had different ethical frameworks. But it is to say that'll help us understand where they were coming from and why they did the things they did. That's really important as we study the long histories of colonialism in New Mexico's past. As we'll see, there's not just one story of colonialism. It's not just Spanish colonialism. There was Spanish colonialism, there was colonialism during the Mexican period, and there was American colonialism in the 19th century forward. All of those things have important legacies in New Mexico's cultures and our current human relationships here in our state. To not belabor this too much, the last thing I want to focus on is sources. Most of us recognize that for the purpose of studying history, primary sources are those that were created at the time of the event that we're studying. That could be anything, as long as it was created at the time of the event. Secondary sources are the sources that were created after the fact. They are based on a collection of primary sources and other secondary sources, and their goal is to answer questions about the past and to essentially put the puzzle together. So if we're going to use that example of history as a puzzle, primary sources are the puzzle pieces, and secondary sources are the attempts to put the puzzle together into a cohesive story, a narrative that we can understand. The questions that we ask about the past are going to determine the kinds of answers that we get, the kinds of sources we look for, and without realizing it, sometimes they might cause us to overlook certain perspectives. So it's always important to keep in mind as many perspectives on the past as we can. That's why I talk about New Mexico histories in the plural rather than New Mexico history. And I think it's also important to recognize that all primary sources are biased. We use the word bias as kind of a negative term, I think, quite often. But for the purposes of studying the past, we have to recognize that every primary source has a certain perspective that it is presenting. It's a piece of the puzzle. We can't base any history on one source alone, or even on a couple. We need multiple sources from multiple perspectives because of that bias in order to understand and come away with a truth about the past. Many of us have kind of alluded to the fact that there's no such thing as pure historical objectivity. There's no such thing as being able to know the absolute historical truth of any event because of the imperfectness of the sources and the ways that we have to come at them in order to make a narrative. But, that being said, that doesn't mean that we can't know truths about the past. And so I think that's also an important distinction to keep in mind going forward. So to end then, even if there is no objective historical truth, that's not to say that history is just a bunch of made up stuff. That's not to say that we can't know anything. We definitely can and we should do our best to have those multiple perspectives and to learn from the past as best we can. And then finally, I had a final thought and I lost it. So I guess we'll leave it there. This video went longer than I meant it to anyway. I hope that you're having a great weekend. Again, I'm really happy with the way that we started the class, the discussion.